The Locked On Podcast Network presents the NBA Big 3 in 30. The 3 biggest stories in the NBA from our local experts at the Locked On Podcast Network. We bring you the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 30 minutes. The NBA Big 3 in 30 starts now with the biggest stories in the NBA.
De'Aaron Fox and the Spurs have agreed to a max extension.
You are Locked On Spurs, your daily San Antonio Spurs podcast.
There's so many implications. There's so many ripple effects that this max deal the Spurs gave Fox is going to have with the Spurs in the medium term, maybe not the short term, but definitely the foreseeable future. It's going to come up like that. So we're going to be talking about that and more right here on Locked On Spurs. And yeah, we need you to subscribe. Keep those subscription numbers going up higher on YouTube. You guys are the everydayers. We appreciate it. It's going to bring in our guest. Look who is back to join us here on Locked On Spurs, Mr. Casey Vieira. It only made sense because we escaped by the skin of our teeth recording the show over the weekend. And then I was freaking out. I was like, oh my goodness, what if I release it? And I did early in the morning yesterday. And 10 minutes later, it happens. But unfortunately, we got a good half a day, Casey, of our thoughts. But it's all but over. It looks like Spurs and Fox, they're good to go, at least for the foreseeable future. Let me start off with your reaction. Your quick reaction when you heard the news.
I was a little bit surprised, not by the money, because I figured it was going to be max money. That didn't surprise me. I'm not as much surprised about the timing because I did think they were going to get the extension done before the start of the year. I was a little bit surprised that they went to the 4th year for both sides. I think that on the Fox side of things, it really would have been enticing theoretically to go 2 years, a player option for a third, and then you hit that opt-out. You have a chance to get an even bigger deal as you near the back end of your career. And then on the Spurs side of things, and this is something we talked about yesterday, was they have the Castle and Harper dynamic to figure out as well. And did they want that to go a little bit more hand in hand with Fox's contract? So I thought that they were kind of leaning that direction. Right. Really, I was mistaken in that thought process. So if anything, I was a little bit surprised about that. But largely, for the most part, numbers not a surprise. The fact that they got it done is not a surprise to me neither.
Yeah. My initial reaction was actually kind of a 3-part reaction. My first one was, okay, no big deal, not a surprise. I felt this was coming. I'm with you. I really felt that it'll be a near max. I don't think it'll be at the max. I really thought the Spurs were going to explore keeping some financial flexibility at the end of that extension. More on that later. To help them with other players. But when they locked him up and the news came out that, the Spurs officially announced it too, that they locked him up for 4 years at max money. I was like, okay. The second thing that I reacted to was this. This is a sign to me that the Spurs want to win. This is a sign not just to the players, to Wemby, but to other NBA free agents down the road that you come to San Antonio, we'll take care of you. Commitments, promises are being kept. They kept the promise of Chris Paul. You'll be a starter for the rest of the season. They did that. They probably had a under-the-table promise to Fox in the Sacramento Spurs trade last season. He'll get a max contract. Nailed it. Done. Moving forward. And the third one, and I get your reaction on this one, is I saw the max number, right, as about 2022, about 229. And my first thought was, that's Luka money. That's Luka Doncic kind of money. I get why you give Luka this kind of deal, but why do you give this to Fox? That was the only kind of like, wow, they really gave him that Luka Doncic, Tyrese Halliburton money. And we'll get into that later. But those were kind of my reaction to that. Any other reactions you had?
I think that it speaks to their commitment to making the 3-guard lineup work. I think that's what it is. I think by them giving him that 4th year, they're willing to really go after it and see what they have there with those 3 guys. And understandably so. I mean, understandably so. They have the luxury of that ability now. They have the luxury of, at its core, at its baseline, just having 3 really good basketball players at those positions who have a chance to make this team special. But yeah, I think the overriding sentiment for me too, and we really got a better idea of this a few months back after the draft, was that this is it. This is the team that they're rolling with now. This is what the man on your screen right there. That's
Oh, let's put him back. Let's put him back. Yeah, might as well. He's the man of the hour.
Bring him back. Yeah, not you, him. There he is. Yeah, but that between him and between Castle and Vassell and Keldon Johnson, and you saw it a little bit more at the trade deadline, pre-Wemby injury, whatever we're going to call it, blood clot, was that it felt like everybody as a result of the trade is kind of falling into their place of their designed roles for what we anticipated them being. And now we're seeing that again, plus the Harper dynamic of it, and you have the money to validate that, so lock it up, go forward. So this is just kind of a continuation of what we saw all the way back in February, that this is the team that they're going to be rolling with. Expect it the rest of the way. And finally, there's that level of uniformity, I guess, that hasn't been here. There's always going to be the hypothetical game, but the hypothetical game, so to speak, is not as rich as it once was, posing superstars, things like that. There's no Giannis talk, there's no Kevin Durant talk. This is it. This is the product, and this is what they're rolling with going forward, and they feel good about it.
Yeah, exactly. And it also signals to the team, to the franchise, to other NBA teams, and of course, possible trade and free agents, that you come to San Antonio, your cornerstones is not going to just be Wemby. It's now Fox. So you can promote that to other players, saying like, hey, you come to San Antonio, you got yourself an all-star guard, and you got yourself an all-world center, and let's rock and roll. How can you help this team moving forward? This is what the NBA is now. And look, and the Spurs are going to have to, keep that going, that 2-star front, because the NBA, to be a good team, you got to have at minimum 2 stars. OKC showed that last year. You need at minimum 2 stars. With Williams and Shea. So, and I think the Spurs have sent out the signal to the rest of the league, to the players. You come to San Antonio, we're about winning. And, kudos to the Spurs and Brad Reich and the management getting it done too, because historically the Spurs have always been like penny pitchers. Oh, they don't pay max deals. They don't do this. No, this is like a different time, different era. Unfortunately, there's no Tim Duncan to give them a hometown discount. That was not going to happen. But it's also too good. It's a good look, the Spurs dealing with Clutch Sports, that agency that seems to control the NBA and players. So there's some good vibes there. Overall, it was a good thing they did. But that max money, we'll get to that in a bit. It's a little concerning, but again, we'll talk about that in a while. One more thing before we hit the break here, Casey, I get your thoughts on this, is that there is some people on social media, I'm not going to name names, they're saying the Spurs did wrong. He was Fox. He's not a max player.
Right.
And you can see some legitimacy to that.
Ever wished managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year.
The Timberwolves made 2 additions to the roster over the last few days.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast.
Let's talk Johnny Juzang. All right. Johnny Juzang, if you're, and to be clear, when the Wolves signed Johnny Juzang, the initial report, I think it was Shams Charania on early Friday morning, reported that Juzang was signing with the Timberwolves, and it shortly thereafter came out, I think it was Chris Hine at the Star Tribune locally that pointed out that this was not a guaranteed deal for Juzang. This is a camp deal. So think of like what the Wolves did, a version of what they did with PJ Dozier last year, a few years ago with Austin Rivers. Austin Rivers ended up hanging around the whole year. PJ Dozier had different dates where portions of his contract would become guaranteed. So the Wolves ultimately moved on from him last year. There's somebody else that Tim Connolly did that with, and I'm blanking on who it was, but similar idea. So now this may just be fully non-guaranteed. That's what this sounds like. It's not Exhibit 10 because he's got a little more NBA experience. So it's like a non-guaranteed deal. My guess is and the Wolves have not announced this, but my guess is there's a date that the Wolves would have to choose to waive him or keep him toward the end of training camp. Basically, if he stays on the roster, the contract becomes at least partially guaranteed. I'm inferring this based on this being a not fully guaranteed camp deal, but the Wolves also could and likely will just cut him. I shouldn't say likely. We don't know how this is all going to shake out at this stage, but they could cut him, no strings attached, whatever, after training camp when they finally set the roster, et cetera. But as we'll talk about later, the Wolves still have open roster spots. So clearly Tim Connolly is all about keeping this flexibility, which we talked about a lot before, and signing Juzang to a camp deal feels like it's absolutely a no-risk deal for the Wolves. But Johnny Juzang's a functional NBA player, I think is the best way to describe him. And he's still relatively young. He just turned 24 in the spring, so he doesn't turn 25 until next March. He was undrafted, didn't play much the first couple of years for Utah. And then last year for a really bad Jazz team that obviously had no interest in actually winning games, he was actually kind of a bright spot for them. He played in 64 games, started 18 games, averaged 20 minutes a game, averaged 9 points, 3 rebounds, and shot almost 38% from three. And it just, albeit 20 games, the year prior, he was 41.5% from three. So overall for his NBA career, he's over 36% from 3-point range. And he really is a 6'7" 2-guard is what he is. The book on him coming out of UCLA, you may remember he started his career at Kentucky. He played a couple years at UCLA. I think it was his second year in college, first year at UCLA. He had a big run in March Madness. The book on him was this dude can shoot, even though the college 3-point shooting numbers weren't like insane. In fact, I've got it right here. He shot 35% from three in college. So far from insane. 36% as a senior, 35.3% his first year at UCLA overall. Good, not great shooter. Not a very good athlete. Like modest at best athlete. Great size, NBA body. Spotty defensively. Probably could use his length and size a bit more to his advantage, but that combined with the lack of athleticism meant that it was like, okay, he's a functional NBA wing offensively. There's perhaps some upside there if the shooting gets better. But he went undrafted, went to Utah, and then last year was actually pretty good overall for them. You look at that roster and the guys that played and didn't play for the Jazz as they were going about their tanking business. Juzang, I thought, was one of their better players. And I think, those college scouting reports, I think a lot of that holds true. I think he's maybe shown a little bit more offensively than maybe people expected as a pro. Again, 9 points per game isn't insane, but on a bad team, like you look at some of the efficiency numbers, like it's all pretty decent. Again, he's 6'7" in shoes, 6'11" wingspan, really good size. It's the modest athleticism, I think, that really kind of limits what his upside can be. He is a good shooter. And again, 37% at the NBA level. It's a smooth looking jumper. He looks the part when he's shooting. He's really good at as a movement shooter, getting himself open to get catch and shoot opportunities. When he's on the floor, that's really what he's going to do. He's got good range. And again, the NBA body is definitely there. What I don't love about Juzang is for his size, and I know he plays the two, but he doesn't rebound the ball very well. He was a pretty mediocre rebounder in college and at the NBA level. Like, again, if you're going to be 6'7" and you're going to be on the floor, even if you're a 2, you just got to rebound the ball a little bit better. He's got rebound rates for his career, 7.5% at the NBA level. Assist rate's not crazy. Like he's not doing much besides catching and shooting. 2/3 of his shots at the NBA level have come from outside the arc. And again, he's doing it at a 36+% clip, which is good. It's basically league average, maybe actually a little bit below over the course of the last 3 years as the league average continues to tick upwards. So he's a shooter, but if that could continue to improve at his size, that's a valuable skill, a valuable commodity. But again, at his size, if he's not going to rebound better, if he's not going to defend better, he's not a great athlete. the upside's limited. All that to say, because the shooting is so good, and because he's an intelligent player, he knows how to get himself open, and he competes defensively, I still think he's a decent kind of fringe rotation NBA player. And I absolutely think he's better than a lot of the guys you're going to see league-wide that get these camp deals that are non-guaranteed. I think he is worth a guaranteed contract at the NBA level. He would not be a bad, if he's your 11th guy, you're in pretty good shape, and that could end up happening. In fact, I use 11th, kind of loosely, like, I'm kind of taking out the guys that, like, he would likely play ahead of a Beranger. He would likely obviously play ahead of like a Rocco Zakarsky, right? You take the full 16, 17 guys when you factor in the two ways. And, he'd be a fringy rotation guy. He'd be a depth piece. He'd be the guy who you get multiple wings that are out due to injury, whatever. Juzang would get an opportunity, and he's shown it at the NBA level. And again, I think what maybe impresses me the most is that he found a way to be a functional and, dare I say, effective NBA player on a really bad team. And there's surely a reason Utah kept him around the last few years. Will Hardy's a good coach, and Juzang seems to be a heady player, a really smart player, an effective rotation guy. I think that's what this is for Minnesota. It's again raising the floor of the roster. They've got their big swings, right? They've got their superstar Anthony Edwards. They've got their secondary stars in Julius Randle and Rudy Gobert, and to a lesser extent, like say Naz Reid, Jaden McDaniels. They've got their role guys. You need to raise the floor of the rest of the roster. And this was the argument I was making, last week, the week before, about what the Wolves are doing with the end of their roster. Like, you can't only bring in guys who are long-term type projects. They've got those too with their draft picks from this year, a pair of 18-year-olds. You've got Rob Dillingham. You've got Leonard Miller. They've got plenty of projects as well. They need more of these solid, like middle-of-the-road NBA players that can raise the floor of your depth in the event of a, I use the term emergency loosely, but in a roster emergency, if you will. Somebody like a Juzang that's a professional NBA player that can give you a plus skill, in this case, hopefully shooting, and size, a little bit of ball handling in the backcourt. He's not going to run your offense, but he can, he could be okay there. That's what this move is. If he ends up sticking around, again, it's non-guaranteed, and we'll talk about the roster situation later. But that's what the Wolves are trying to do with Juzang.
We've all been there, logging on early and waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show you've been dying to see. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping. That's where Gametime comes in. Gametime makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. Prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime, and you can save up to 60% off with their killer last-minute deals. With Gametime, the price you see is the price you pay. No hidden fees. Take the guesswork out of buying concert and show tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, the lowest price, guaranteed.
We scrutinize the players on the Heat roster, but what about the team's head coach?
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast.
I think one of the things I never would have associated with Eric Spoelstra was a kind of lack of direction, or it seemed like maybe there were moments last season where he just wasn't as fully engaged as we've grown accustomed to. I think a lot of Heat fans recognize Eric Spoelstra as one of the greats of the game in terms of his success. And yes, has he relied on incredible players in order to gain that success? Guess what? That's how it works. You don't win with G League level players in the NBA. And Eric Spoelstra has taken advantage of it. It's about managing egos. It's about getting the most out of teams regarding talent level, etc. And that being the case, I think last year, and I think we both agree on this, was a subpar one, even for Eric Spoelstra. I think there were moments there where he looked a little burnt out. And this season, what I'd like for him, and again, this is something I never would have said, coach with intent, to use the words that Eric Spoelstra loves using in terms of his players. Coach with intent. Seem like you're out there and trying to make the most out of this roster. And this, maybe this is kind of vague and overgeneralized, but there were moments last year where it seemed like the team was directionless, and I know you were just trying to steer things in the right direction, given everything that was happening in that locker room and behind the scenes and trying to incorporate new players. It wasn't easy for anybody. But there were still moments there where Eric Spoelstra, I think, let the team down. And I think he'd be the first to admit it. And I think this summer is going to be an important one for him in terms of recharging, regaining that level of focus, and coming into next season with a renewed sense of purpose and intent. And that's what I'd like to see from Spo, is making sure he gets the most of this roster and to take each practice, each game as purposefully, as seriously as possible, because this team, quite frankly, isn't good enough to take days off nor games off. So they have to go out there, and I'd like to see a team that is more aligned with the motto and mantra of the Miami Heat and go out there and work their butts off every night in order to find a way to win.
If Eric Spoelstra made 2 mistakes last year, I think one that he started the season with was trying to turn that roster into a 5-out offense roster. And that was not going to happen. He tried to lean into a Terry Rozier, Tyler Hero backcourt with Jimmy Butler kind of playing a little bit more point guard, which, based on Jimmy Butler's own comments and the people around Jimmy Butler, he was either happy with or not happy with, depending on the day. And then with Bam, with the three-point shooting and all of that, it just felt like Bam was getting further and further away from the basket. And that was, I think that might have been the wrong use of the offense. I think he was trying to learn something from the Boston Celtics, the way that they won the championship with three-point shooting. And by the way, this team does need to figure out how to get up more threes, and they did get up more threes last year. So I think there was some of that idea was right, but trying to turn this into a 5-out offense, I think, wasn't the proper use of the roster. And then the second thing that was the big mistake there was just like the game management stuff, the calling the timeouts when he didn't have one, the not calling timeouts when you probably should call the timeouts, not challenging plays when you probably should in close games. That's stuff that got away from Eric Spoelstra last year, but I am not at all concerned about going forward. You mentioned his need to recharge. I don't think that anybody in the history of the world needed a vacation more than Eric Spoelstra needed a vacation after what he had gone through between the coaching and the drama and the personal life stuff and everything that had been going on the last 2 or 3 years, and just the lack of summers and the Olympics that he had and the finals runs. It's just like, this guy, he just seemed burnt out to me, honestly. And that happens to the best of them. And Eric Spoelstra is quite literally the best of them right now in the league. And so I think with a summer recharged, with a chance to reflect on things, he will be just better. But that's not to say that he can't improve on some things, and that's not to say that we don't want to see certain things change. And I think a big part of this, David, is the fact that the Jimmy Butler era is over. And the way that he coached the Jimmy Butler-led teams cannot be the way that he coaches these teams. And I think he understands that. I think we're already seeing it, the way that he called out Khalil Ware using the media. I think this is a young roster. The average age of this roster is like 25, 26 years old. That's an inherently different kind of team. You're coaching an inherently different kind of player. And the way you go about coaching that team has to be different. And I think we're already starting to see that from Spo a little bit.
I agree. I think that's part of it. Is he's talked about it, and we're getting closer to media day and training camp and everything else like that. So we're already, at least my internal clock for the NBA season is already starting to work that way, and I'm already trying to figure out exactly what the pulse of this team is going to be. And Eric Spoelstra always says that when it comes to training camp, that every camp is different. It's almost like an organism, and that it has a different vibe every time. And what's the main theme of the camp and everything else like that. And I think he needs to figure out what the pulse of this team is. Like, what is the motivating factor? What is it going to be that unites this group? What is it going to be that motivates them and takes them to that next level? What's going to drive them? And understand how these players were all going to work towards getting better individually and working together as a team. And so I'd like to see that from Spo as well, just being able to kind of understand this group a little better. And I think the age is a big factor in that, because you cannot apply the same methodology that you used in years past with an older team that was gearing for a longer playoff run, that needed to take off, let's say November through March, take those months off knowing that you were going to try to go on a longer playoff run. This isn't that kind of group. You need to be able to play with intent on a daily basis, at the start of the season, the middle of the season, at the end.
I have a specific thing for my first list item here for Eric Spoelstra. long rotation, short leash. That's what I think this roster has to have. I'm looking at this depth chart, and there's a lot to try to figure out here from that depth chart. Yeah. I think there's 13 guys who I think, 12 to 13 guys who I think need to play, or maybe not need to play, have a case to play. You look at what we project to be the starting five: Tyler Hero, Norm Powell, Andrew Wiggins, Bam Adebayo, Khalil Ware. You can look at the bench guys: Davion Mitchell, Pella Larson, Jaime Jaquez Jr., Haywood Highsmith, Nikola Jovic, Simon Fontecchio, Kasparis Yakachonis. Heck, if Terry Rozier looks better in camp, there's a case to be made that Rozier should get some minutes.
No doubt.
So I'm thinking 12 to 13 guys here have a case to play. I would probably say 10 need to play, maybe 11. And so I think he needs to have a long rotation. I think he should be playing 12 to 13 guys every night. With that said, though, short leash. You make a mistake, you're out. Done. Not maybe for the whole game, but we're mixing things up, right? Like, we have 13 guys who need to play, and if it's not your night, there's only so many minutes to go around. We'll allocate those minutes elsewhere. And you know, I think that's going to be key. I want to see. I think that level of competition plus opportunity is something that can kind of get what you're talking about, having that intention every single day, getting better every single day. I think those two things can go together, where if you're giving those players the opportunity, but also fostering that level of competition where your minutes aren't necessarily guaranteed outside of, obviously, like the starters and the main top 7 or 8 guys. Like, those guys are going to play. You need to have some sort of, you know, coherent rotation every single night. But I want to see him go deep into this bench, at least for the first half of the season.
I think it's a great call. There's a point that I'd like to piggyback off of that, but I think I'll save that for our next segment. But overall, I do like the idea of doing things a little differently. You know, we're talking about the approach on a daily basis, but also when you look at the number of players who can play. And we've made this point before. This might be the deepest team that Eric Spoelstra's ever had. And that's kind of funny because, again, there might not be that top-tier talent on the roster, but you have many playable guys on there that can all offer something different. So, and they all can play at the NBA level, maybe not sustainably, maybe not two-way factors, but at the same time, there's still a lot of players here that can make an impact on the game, and finding that right balance is going to be crucial for Eric Spoelstra.